The first speaker today is Carol Booth. Carol spends most of her time as a policy analyst, advocate and writer for the environmental NGOs, with a strong focus on invasive species. On the other days, she reaps the pleasures of among her plants and lizards on her nature refuge property on the Granite Belt. As a member of the Stanthorpe Rare Wildflower Consortium, Carol has conducted surveys for rare plants, prepared threatened species listings and developed management recommendations. She has a PhD in biology and one in environmental philosophy, focused on motivations for nature conservation. Today, Carol's going to be talking about helping local communities helping rare plants. Thanks, Carol.
Oh. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So, if you love wildflowers and if you love lizards, I recommend you consider going to live in the Granite Belt. It's in southern Queensland on the western edge of the Great Dividing Range. So, in 2008, my partner, a friend, and I became custodians of a local, of a nature refuge property on the Granite Belt. And it's been an exhilarating experience to get to know the plants and animals in a fairly intimate way. But of course, the jubilation of that is combined with the weight of responsibility, trying to manage some very difficult threats. Goats and deer eating your endangered plants, exotic grasses relentlessly advancing, and the summer threat of extreme fires. And one of the great things we discovered about the Granite Belt was the existence of a local conservation group dedicated to saving rare plants. So more on that a bit later. So up in the left is that gorgeous leaf-tailed geckos. It's last month listed under the EPBC Act as endangered, but that's the last time I'll mention lizards. All plants from now on. So the Granite Belt, it's a fabulous place for plants in a fairly small region, which roughly coincides with the Stanthorpe Plateau sub-bioregion. There's more than 900 plant taxa, at least 18 locally endemic, several others just hop over the New South Wales border, and then there are others found in the New England tableland bioregion. New species are still being discovered, a new Homoranthus in 2009, and the Dalveen blue box was described after being split, described in 2019. One reason for the high diversity and endemicity is that it's at the intersection of the temperate Bassian province and the subtropical tropical Teresian province. At least 49 plants reach their northern range in the Granite Belt, and several others reach their southern limits. Another reason is the ruggedness of some of the landscape, and it's functioned as a refuge in during past glacial ages. And the combination of granite and plants is always very beautiful. One of my difficult tasks for this report was choosing or working out which photos not to include. So here's just a very few. But of course, it's also been terribly damaged, like most other parts of Australia, by the mega threats. The land clearing for agriculture, less than half of it, is remnant vegetation. Weeds and invasive animals and fire. Too much fire in some places, too little fire in others, and of course, the looming threat of climate change. What's that doing there? Oops. Okay. So 27 species, I think that's the latest, listed as threatened under national or state laws. Another 13 listed as near threatened. A couple of ecological communities critically endangered, which have some part in the granite belt. And of the 13 regional ecosystems mapped in the region by the Queensland government, 8 are endangered and 3 are of concern. Sorry, I'm not familiar enough with the slides I put in, obviously. So for all of us who are engaged in saving rare plants, one of the big challenges we face is how to effectively engage more Australians in the effort to protect threatened species and how to elevate them as a community and political issue. While we can't give up on pushing governments, we're all sadly aware of their failings, the fact that threatened species lists keep going up, something like 1,500 on the national list, many plants not listed or not listed at the right level, no monitoring, few recovery plans, particularly for plants, and even then they're often not implemented well. And on the threats side, we also don't have comprehensive listing of threats, including myrtle rust, not listed, and threat abatement or action plans are often not well implemented. We also know that the charms of plants are not well appreciated by decision makers, and they don't necessarily compete very well for scarce funding. They're not koalas. So particularly for plants, the fate of many species relies on how effectively we can motivate local communities and individual landholders to care for them. Now, this was where I was going to go to that. So this biodiversity survey, 2023, I think, by the Biodiversity Council suggests there's a lot of potential to engage more people in local conservation. It's the highlighted one, and it's the yellow. It's the 47% of people say that they're willing but not yet engaged. So one of the great things, as I mentioned, when I moved to the Granite Belt was discovering the existence of the Stanthorpe Rare Wildflower Consortium. And for us today, it can serve as a really interesting case study of the potential for activating local communities. The organisation is 20 years old this year, started in 2004, and it was actually initiated by Paul Donaghue. And many of you will be familiar with Paul when he was working for WWF. It started with about 10 members and apparently now has about 60 members, although not all of them are active. And for a small volunteer group, it's done some pretty amazing stuff. It's fortunate to have some members with really great skills, botanical skills, publication skills, organising skills, photography skills. And importantly, it's also got a few people who really know how to get things done and know how to make other people get things done as well. And, I'll do a shout out to Liz Bourne, who is also here, and some of you will know, because she's been certainly one of the movers and shakers for the organisation. It's received several grants along the way to do things, but the majority of the work is done on a voluntary basis. It's focused on public education, plant surveys, some conservation work. I was meant to be showing this one. So, publications. Look at this monster. So this is a flora of the Granite Belt, and sold about 2,000 copies. And this is, several brochures have also been published. This one has sold something like 10,000 copies. And yet a couple of other books as well as several other brochures. So one mainstay for the organisation has been wildflower walks in spring. And they're very popular. Typically 3 a year. The numbers are capped and they're always booked out, essentially. And they've been a really powerful way of enthusing both locals and visitors about the local plants, including landholders who happen to have some of these plants on their properties. The organisation does occasional workshops, talks, media, did workshop on fire, how to identify eucalypts, and the Queensland Threatened Plant Network, Paul, did one recently for the consortium on survey techniques. The consortium participates in local events such as Garden Fest and Eco Expo and local media. So these educational projects have had really tangible benefits for plant conservation. One really important outcome is they establish relationships with local landholders. And as people keep mentioning, landholders are not necessarily keen to invite, particularly governments, sometimes researchers as well, onto their properties, but they will reach out to a local group and people they often know. And so sometimes we get onto properties, ask advice, find new threatened species. Generates new information, people contacting the consortium to say, hey, what's this plant? Is it one of those threatened species? For example, we found a complete new location for the critically endangered Dalveen blue box through the daughter of the owner contacting the consortium and saying, do you think this could be it? My neighbour, actually, she's on a nature refuge next door. She'd been looking at this plant, a few sticks, over a few years, wondering what it was, and then it flowered, and she keyed it out and discovered it was narrow-leaved guinea flower, Hybertia tenuifolia, which had actually been suspected to be extinct, at least in New South Wales. It hadn't been recorded, apparently, for 50 years or more in Queensland and something like 30 years in New South Wales. One really important benefit of the consortium and local groups generally is that there are ears and eyes out on the lookout for nefarious activities. Illegal clearing, for example. Oh, wait a minute. I'm forgetting the slide. So that's the guinea flower that my neighbour just found again. And this is the little story about illegal clearing. So one of our consortium members happened to be driving up a local road and saw that there was bulldozer out and some farmer laying irrigation pipes in habitat for the critically endangered black grevillea. So you can see the black grevillea, and then the reason. That's doing surveys for the black grevillea, trying to find them in amongst all the bracken, and then that's the newly laid irrigation pipe. Unfortunately, so something like 20% of the population was lost due to that, and there was an investigation, but unfortunately a prosecution didn't proceed, and we're not quite sure why. There was intention, but something didn't work. So yeah, the reason we knew that we'd lost 20% was that we'd actually done surveys the year before. So we knew exactly how many plants were in that patch that had been destroyed. So another result is that we have become slightly more influential with local government. I mean, local government doesn't have anyone whose job it is to focus on threatened plants or species, and no bushland officer, because it's a rural local government. But they had actually approved the farmer to go and lay this pipe because they actually didn't know there was an endangered plant there. They did put that the farmer was meant to go and get approval from the state government if necessary as well. But since then, Liz often gets phone calls from the local government saying, is there anything on this piece of roadside? We also have had improved relationships with local utilities, Ergon, showing them where threatened species are and where they need to be a bit more careful with where they put their cuttings. So the organisation also has done plant surveys over the years, and recently we've done some nominations. So Black Grevillea, the one I mentioned, the reason we knew we'd lost 20% is the year before we'd done the numbers. It chooses to live in rather dangerous locations. 2/3 of it is on public roadside, and the other third is on private property, and it seems to love dams. And so that one's actually just on a bit off a dam which had been scraped a few years previously. It loves disturbance, and it would love a D9 to go in regularly, probably. So yeah, typical threats: habitat destruction, increasing density of forest habitats due to lack of fire, weed invasion, and unfortunately we found recently as well Phytophthora dieback. So yeah, the surveys were done mainly by 4 volunteers. We did the nomination, and it was then listed as critically endangered, both at the state level and federal level. So looking at some of the threats, the poor thing being smothered by lovegrass there, dead potentially due to Phytophthora, pine invasion, clearing. So the other one we did was Dalveen Blue Box, which was 5 minutes. Ooh, okay. So yes, we did surveys of Dalveen Blue Box, which is also listed as critically endangered, and the reason is that most of its habitat has been cleared. We've done recently surveys of endangered Boronias and we had the help of a community action grant from the Queensland Department of Environment and Science. And I mean, the really interesting thing about that was the surveys went over 3 years and covered period of extreme drought, the worst drought on record, extreme rainfall, some of the highest rainfalls on record, and extreme wildfires, which burned some of the Boronia repanda. And we found, it's quite clear that rather than being an obligate cedar, as it was said to be on the EPBC site, it was actually had pretty impressive resprouting abilities, as you can see in this photo, where we're looking on a recently burned property for it. And we've also started, the Queensland government reached out to us with the proposal to do some recovery action planning with them and to establish a partnership. So that's fairly early days yet, but we have some draft plans that we're hopefully going to progress fairly soon. So lots of challenges for local groups. Take off your rose-coloured glasses. There are some difficulties. Lack of control over the major threats. Local community action's not the panacea for effective threat abatement. We need good laws and policies and threat abatement programs. Lack of fundamental information about the plants. For example, lack of knowledge of the fire responses. Something like of the 40 that are near threatened plants, there's information, a little bit of information about less than a third, and some of that is not reliable. Limited funding and the grants rigmarole. The reliance on a few key people. You lose someone, it leaves a big gap. The hazards of volunteering, incomplete or slow projects. And I've got a terribly guilty conscience about work I committed to do for some more nominations that I haven't done because my life just got crazy busy with work. One big one is data management, information management. There's so much data we've got from previous surveys just in computers or on data sheets that the government does not have. And that's really something that weighs heavily on our conscience, but getting the time to do that and motivating people to do it, it's proved really difficult. Key skills are often lacking, the fact that they had to rely on me for GIS, and my skills are at best rudimentary. Okay. So getting on to the final slide. So there's no shortage of things that a well-motivated group can do with good support. And I think it would really benefit plant conservation for us all to think much more about how the strategies we need to activate and support local groups. Some obvious ones, I'll just whiz through: skills training, of course, some of which we're getting. Really focusing on how to increase local capacity for fire management. That's such a big one. Research needed to inform how to do it, what you need to be doing. Practical support for landholders. Training rural fire brigades, that they understand that there are some pretty rare plants that they need to be careful of. Post-burn monitoring to see what happens. As I mentioned, data management systems. We need really easy, efficient systems to make sure the data becomes available more broadly. We also need information capture of natural history observations. Within our group, we know more about the species we've been looking at than is in any of the formal advice, conservation advice. But there's nowhere really for that information to be then have an effect on the publicly available information. You'd think every threatened species should have an information portal where people can upload observations and you can upload the reports that you do that you send off to government, and they're never seen after that. So I think that one's a really important one to motivate groups to contribute to the broader knowledge. Research partnerships. We're only 3 and a bit hours from university, or even less if you count Toowoomba. But there's been so little research done on the plants in the Granite Belt. Lots of great research projects for honours, masters, PhD students, and universities should be really encouraged to help fill the gaps in regional areas, given the lack of other resources there. There are pivotal research questions that groups like ours can contribute to, and be good to identify them, and then to have a scientific framework for contributing data. And obvious ones are for fire responses and pollinators. Partnerships, a really appealing concept, but very demanding. Both partners need the capacity and the motivation to meet their commitments and maintain the relationship. And we know that, local and state governments, they actually have very limited capacity. And the beauty of partnerships can be that they can be effective advocates for each other and really, have synergistic benefits for gaining resources. Governments like to support groups where there's evidence that they're doing stuff. And, private protected areas. They've just been so important in the Granite Belt. Understandably, governments now, the Queensland government is focusing on larger properties, so we don't have many recent nature refuge declarations, but they're so important, not just for the legal protection you gain, but to motivate landholders who know that, by that status, they have something special on their place, and hopefully it does motivate them to care more carefully. And finally, we do need really good motivational strategies for encouraging local conservation and tapping into the potential that there is, generating local pride in the special plants. One of my KPIs for that is for the signs at the edge of the local government area, which currently once you go over Cunningham's Gap, it shows a crop of sunflowers. So I think when they replace that with some of the special species, that will be a sign of great advance. Just pie in the sky ideas. They have a bounty for dingoes, unfortunately. Wouldn't it be great to replace that with a bounty for threatened or missing plants? Not to kill them, but to provide location data. rates notices going out with these species. Have you seen them? Obviously, rates, rebates would be great for people who do conservation. But, money might not be the most powerful motivator. We need the stories and the images and to showcase their beauty, natural history strategies, cultural importance. Plants do their bit by being beautiful. That's all they need to do. But we need to do our bit by telling more compelling stories to local community and Australians more broadly. Oh yes, so the beauty. Finishing with the beauty. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Great talk. It's interesting, the challenges seem to come up, the same ones come up over and over again.
Do. We're not unique, yes.
No. Look, we've got time for a couple of quick questions, if anyone has any. Otherwise, you can wait till the end where we'll have a question time as well. One there.
Thanks, Carol. That was a really interesting talk, and congratulations for having that group go for so long. What do you say to people when they might say, well, why does it matter, this tiny little plant, there's only 20 of them left, why bother?
That's such a fundamental question.
It's a philosophical question, but I'm interested, seeing you worked on philosophy, I'm interested in your answer.
Obviously, there's the ethical dilemma. These species have been around for a long time, and so you can talk about intrinsic value. I'm not sure that term means a lot to people. I think the fact, people have a sense of the pathos of something that's going missing. So I think we can make a lot more of that. I've got a plant on my place, Birchia recovata, and I think, that's not really very beautiful, but just really understanding, what it does to live there, how it survives. It's those stories, and I think you can turn people on to rare plants, even if they don't look beautiful, through, understanding. That's the hope anyway. So not terribly philosophical, but, I actually called something I did beauty, duty, delight and happiness, motivations for nature conservation. So it's a mix of things, I think.
Thanks very much, Carol. I think it is intrinsic too. I think there is something, intrinsically nice about doing these things.